So it's with my very greatest pleasure to bring up some of the top podcasters. And one of them's unique. My friend Whitney. Come here, my friend Whitney. Love this guy. And he's on this panel for a very specific reason. Who thinks that they should start a podcast? Who actually believes I should have a podcast? I should have one. That would be good for me if I had a podcast. Now keep your hands up only if the reason you have not yet started that podcast is because you don't yet think you're the most credible person to have that podcast. Keep your hands up. And it's exactly why I have Whitney Sewell, who owns 300-ish doors. But when he started this podcast called The Syndication Show, he never syndicated a deal. But he knew what it was going to do for his business, and now he has 300 doors. Let it sink in. That's why Whitney's up here specifically, because you got to take these massive actions. You're raising your hand saying, I know I should do that. I know I should have a platform. I just don't feel like I have the credibility yet. So definitely with your Q&A, ask Whitney a few questions on how he started, why he started it, what was the mind frame, what has it done for him. Other than that, we've got a few other people. My good friend Kathy Fedke, and who is incredible. She is one of the first people that ever started a podcast. When did podcasts come out? What year was that? I always thought it was 2014 because that's when I first got an iPhone. When did they really come out? 2006. When did you start yours? Crazy. All right, so Mike Hambright as well has the Flip Nerd podcast. And I think that he's put out 1,500 episodes. It's crazy. So you're going to learn a lot about why he started, how he started it, when he started it, what he's gotten from it. And recently he started raising equity for deals. He's now partnering in on deals, and his thought leadership platform has made it a lot easier. And then we've got another good friend of mine, Kevin Bupp, not this guy, that guy, the middle guy. Raise your hand. Kevin Bupp has the mobile home. You have two podcasts. Say the names.
The first one is Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow, and then I started that about 5 years ago. And then the second is the Mobile Home Park Investing Podcast. So that's about 2 years old.
Awesome. And so we'll talk a bit about how everybody in the nation really thinks of Kevin when they think about mobile homes, because he's got the Mobile Home Park podcast. So as you say, it's just incredible. Like, you don't have to be multifamily. You don't have to be flipper. Who was it yesterday? Rex. Rex, are you in here? Rex, what's your niche again?
Sober living.
And you're in my mastermind, and I'm making you start a podcast, right?
Yes.
You have to start a podcast, and it's the first sober living podcast that I know of, and he's going to be famous because of it. All right, so then the next person that I want to share is Corey Boatwright, who bought a ticket to the event, and I was like, hey, the next day I woke up super early. I was like, I want you on stage. So I was like, can you be on my stage? And I'm going to have a podcast panel. And I thought this was going to be significant. So he was really the reason why I said I really should have a podcast panel of folks that have a thought leadership platform through podcasting. And you have more than one, too, don't you?
Yeah.
What are they?
So Real Estate Tech
Nope,
Show.
nope, nope. You got it.
Real Estate Tech Show with Joe McCall and Real Estate Investing Profit Masters. Yeah.
Rama. He always does that. Without fail, this is an annual event. 100% of the time, he's done that. At the second annual, I hope you don't do it again, though. All right, so here we go. We are going to do Q&A, so I need my other mic runner, and this is all questions from the audience. So raise your hand. Who wants to know something? You're number two? No, you're number one, because you're already there.
Hello, and thank you for being up here. My main question is after talking to Adam last night, What got you over the fear to do your first podcast, especially like Whitney, where you never syndicated and you did a syndication podcast? How did you get over that fear? What was the key point and or thought that came through your head to get over that fear?
I think you finally have to be tired of where you're at and you want something different. And so it's about making a decision and commitment for a big change. And one, Richard Wilson really hit on this yesterday, and it resonated with me, is you have to stop caring about what everybody else thinks about you. That was really big. And you have to commit. You have to make that decision. You have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone. And so that's what I had to do. And so I had long story short, I had a business that I was growing, and it was taking many hours away from my family, and it hit me that it was never going to be passive. And so I sold everything and committed to real estate. And there's a lot more details in that story, but it helped me to kind of burn the bridge and be committed. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it happen. And so that's where I'm at now.
Mine wasn't necessarily a fear. Mine was more laziness than anything else. Got a little bit of a funny story behind it. I bought the equipment about a year before I actually started the podcast, built a studio in my house, didn't know what the hell I was doing at all, how to use the equipment really. And my wife finally said, if you don't start that podcast that you've been talking about, you're selling that equipment, and we're turning this room back into a bedroom. I said, okay, I'll start it. So anyway, I ultimately did it, and mine was more out of necessity. I've been listening to podcasts. As Adam had said, podcasts have been around a long time, and I used to do a lot of driving. I've been listening to podcasts for many years. And there was no podcast that focused on commercial real estate investing. So I started mine because there was no content out there that ultimately was the subject matter that I want to hear myself. And I figured if only what came out of it was the fact that I could add value to folks and get to meet some really cool people on the other line, then it was worth it. And ultimately I started with the idea of just adding value and giving back to those that were listening, because there was, again, no content matter out there in the space. But just know that if you're doing an interview show, you're just having a conversation with somebody. Just like you asked us a question up here, ultimately you've got questions. 5 or 6 questions can literally drive an hour-long conversation with someone on the other side. And the person that you're interviewing is doing 95% of the work. So just think about that when you've got the fear of getting into it. And if you're doing your own individual show by yourself, that's a little bit different. But interviewing is quite easy. So forget the fear, scrape it off to the side, and just get started with one.
I agree with the same thing. I don't know how to say anything different than what they've said, but I was going to, before you even said it, the interview style helps make things a lot easier, I think, because I created a lot of content before I had a podcast, just doing videos, and I had a, I'm embarrassed to kind of say this, I had a videographer like on my staff kind of follow me around, and it's like, I'm just talking to a camera, it feels weird, like I have to keep coming up with new things to talk about, but when I have a conversation with somebody, like you never know exactly where the conversation is going to go, and I never have a hard time talking to anybody, so I think one thing I want to say about that, because we talked last night about you starting a podcast, because I probably relegated my authority for way too long on my podcast. So I was interviewing experts from all over the country, but I had bought hundreds of houses too. But I kind of relegated that authority for a long time before I realized that I need to be doing this show. There has to be a business reason behind the show, not just me making new friends and kind of hanging out, which I did for years. My podcast we're about to hit 5 years. So, and then I realized, hey, I can't relegate my authority if I want to sell coaching, right? Things like that. So you have to think about what your end goal is as to why you want to do it, and make sure that you always kind of interlace that in with good content.
All right, so I'm back here. What have you found is a great way to build up your email list with a podcast? As anybody who's done podcasting knows, it's hard to get people to actually go through your site and come through that other than just listening to your show. So what have been some good ways to get people to actually interact with you, to be able to get their email so you can communicate with them further?
For us, well, I will just answer that last question, because I think it is important to just know that you don't have to be perfect. Did anyone listen to my show in 2006 or 7? Because it was real bad. It was terrible. I had no idea what I was doing. But from that, somebody in Australia, people listen all over the world. Somebody in Australia heard, loved it, flew me out, and I spoke in front of 1,000 investors that all thought I was a celebrity from America. So anyway, and that, so it's amazing what can come of it. And it doesn't cost very much to start. In fact, it's really just free. I've done podcasts on my phone when my equipment didn't work, and it sounded pretty good. So you don't have to overthink it. But how to drive people to the site. Usually, people will do all kinds of things, but you can offer free things, downloads. If you, on the topic that you're talking about, you can say, I've got more on the blog, or if you'll, if I've got this gift of a, article or something. And with syndication, it's really great because basically you can say, wish I could tell you about this, but I can't. So go sign up and then I'll tell you about it.
So this is a loaded question. So you could spend hours on this conversation. I spent a year with a guy named Eben Pagan. Anybody heard of Eben Pagan? Pretty much a genius marketer, in my opinion. Did probably $100 million in e-commerce, and he was one of the kind of the founders of this thing called the squeeze page. Anybody heard of a squeeze page? So what you're asking about is that squeeze page. And one of the things that set him apart was he called pushing the free line. And there's this idea that all of our best stuff, that we have to hold it to our chest and just kind of give away just the stuff that, is kind of cool, or you might be able to use it, but you keep the good stuff to yourself. So the encouragement is to give away some really good stuff, almost like your best type of stuff, and make it really valuable to that person. So you're providing value to them, you're serving them first, and then from that, because you serve them first, you can actually kind of, this is the loaded part of it, whatever you're giving them, you could actually make it where the free thing is also a part of what you want them to do, which in this case would be listen to more podcasts, right? So one of the things that we do is we give away these other interviews that we think are kind of some of the better interviews, and so they also get the ultimate real estate quick start guide and these other little interviews. And so they are already thinking about this whole podcast thing anyway, and now we're going to give them the best, kind of the best of these interviews. And that just adds another little piece to them. So just move the free line and give away something very, very valuable, and they will love it.
Yeah, I'll add something to that. And ebook, that's an easy one. A lot of people talk about Upwork this weekend. Ultimately, you could put together a very short ebook or white paper. Something that we did recently, this is for the Mobile Home Park podcast, is we were doing due diligence on a park that we were buying. And so I literally just hired a very inexpensive videographer to follow us around for like an hour and a half in the park. Spent a little bit more time in the park than what I normally would have, but literally gave that away as a free due diligence video. Like, this is us on site walking through the park, went through some of the more intricate parts of the due diligence with them, and people ate it up. And that was easy. I was already doing it. I was already going to be in that community. I just paid about $400 for a videographer to follow me around, and didn't even edit the video. I mean, I literally just like chopped the front off, chopped the back off, didn't worry about anything in the middle, and gave it away, and people dug it. They ate it up. So don't try to be a perfectionist. Just think about, what are people looking for? How can I add value to them? And just get something out there.
Okay, I have a question over here. How do you get your podcasts to stand out of all the others, like, and not excluding just the actual topic? What do you use to stand out?
That's hard. I started my podcast about 5 years ago. At the time, there were probably maybe 8 or 10 real estate podcasts. Not Kathy's was out there. Joe McCall had his. A few people, but not a lot. And now there's a million people out. Not a million, but there's a lot. You just saw how many people raise their hand that wanted to start a podcast. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. If you think of how many people have a blog, it's like ridiculous, right? So there's plenty of room. I don't think you should not start your podcast for fear of not standing out. And I think just a couple people have said it, just have to be yourself. Like, you're going to find some people that resonate with you almost no matter what. So you don't have to like be different than everybody else. You just have to be yourself, and some people will resonate with that. I think back to your question about how do you get people to find you, like, it kind of depends. This is what I struggled with for a long time. Corey and I have talked about this a bunch. It depends on what your goal is at the end. Because let's say you have coaching, or you're raising money for deals, you have some way to monetize that at the end, then you can afford to do different things on the front end, right? So if you're just giving away everything for free and you have nothing to sell, then you don't have a marketing budget, right? So you have to it depends on what your end goal is, but for a long time I gave away a lot of stuff for free, and I mean, we still do. We have over 1,500 podcasts, but I didn't really have a good business case for my podcast. My other businesses were making so much money that I was just like, it was a very, very expensive hobby because for me, it wasn't a podcast. I have a team. I have like, I don't know, we want to get into some of the mistakes we made along the way. But it really depends on what your objective is. Because if you have a marketing budget, it makes everything easier.
It's very important to niche down, right? Everybody hears that, especially with starting a podcast. However, I wouldn't get focused on, well, there's so many podcasts. I've heard that so many times. Well, why do you want to do a podcast? There's so many podcasts. Well, that's so irrelevant. That's so irrelevant that there's so many podcasts. Podcasting does so much for your thought leadership platform. It's incredible what it's done for me just in a very short amount of time. I've got to meet and network with some of the biggest players in this business before I'd ever done a syndication. So I got to develop those relationships and provide content to people just like you before I'd ever done a syndication. And so it's made me learn, made me grow, made me meet people that otherwise I would have never known.
I was just going to say there's so much room and there's so many people and so many ears out there. I don't know if there's a lot of millennial shows, for example. Women, come on, we need more. There's so many opportunities out there. One of the ways to get your name out there is to interview people who do have a following, and most of us know the power of that. We'll go. I'm sure you guys will go on other people's podcasts as well because it's all the time, right? So if you can get somebody who has a large following or a large list, I mean, it could be someone from your church or your soccer team or whatever, that they want to share with everyone. Oh my gosh, listen to me on this podcast, and then you start to get fans.
Yeah, I'm just going to second something that Mike said regarding like there's someone out there in this world, many people that are going to resonate with your message. So just know that it's a very big, wide open space. There could be 100 podcasts all on the same exact topic with 100 different hosts, and they're all going to reach a different audience. So just don't worry about that. Know that your message is going to resonate with tens of thousands of folks out there.
Hello. Excuse me. Hi, guys. I'm looking to start a podcast, and I just would like to know, me as a newbie, I'm like a perfectionist. Like, I'll get all the equipment, get everything started, no podcast. What are some of the things I can do just to start out and just to get started? And I would also like to know, what are some of the techniques or things that you've used that made your podcast successful, and what are some of the biggest mistakes you can advise me to avoid?
I'll just say to start, just write down 20 ideas and just start recording. Get about 5 to 10 shows recorded, and remember, it's pretty much free. So you can launch, and if it totally flops and fails, no big deal. Then you could do another one later. But you just need to start it and get going, and I bet it's really going to be just fine the way it is. But start by just writing down the ideas, and all of a sudden you'll start thinking about people you want to talk to or interview or topics you want to address. Kind of making it unique. One of the things that I have my 20-minute show. 20 minutes is a good amount of time. The Real Wealth Show, and then. Well, the Real Wealth Show is a 20-minute show. It used to be an hour. Oh, yeah, I would blab and blab and blab about nothing important. So I've learned 20 minutes. People don't have a lot of time. And then another sort of unique thing was real estate news. 6 to 7 minutes a day of real estate news. It's fairly unique. So you could come up and you too. You're doing something like that. So you can differentiate from what other people are doing with something like that.
I like what Kathy said. I'll just tell you a few things that we do that'll just hopefully simplify it, because it's real easy to overcomplicate things. So we've done around 1,500 podcasts with a $70 webcam. Like, people think I have a studio. I have a canvas print of my logo behind my desk. I do have a $200 or $300 microphone, but that's not even necessarily required. Literally, it's just, it couldn't be more simple. Anybody that comes in my office, they're like, "This is it?" I was like, "Yeah, this is it." It's pretty simple. So we really don't have to do much. I would say we have a Google Doc sheet, so I have a bunch of VAs. Most of my employees are actually not in my office. We have a Google Doc spreadsheet, and we just track show number 1. Here's the person I had on the show. Here's a summary of what we talked about. Here's what I'm going to title the show, which I come up with after the show, like things like that. We have another tab where I like prospective guests, just people that I want to ask. and we kind of have a hit list. And so you could do all this in a spreadsheet and keep it pretty simple for the most part. But I think a couple things that all these people would agree with is consistency is key. Like my show used to be 3 a week for a year and a half, then it went to 2 a week for 6 months, and then for the last 3 years it's been 1 a week, because it's a lot of work. It can be a lot of work if you let it. Of course, I do it the hardest way, video and creating audio versions as well and all that. But consistency is key. We've never not published a show 1 week ever. So I see people that like have a podcast and it's just sitting out there and like, well, they haven't published anything in like a year and a half, and that's just kind of the kiss of death. So when you decide to do it, just be committed, but there's a way to keep it simple too.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add to that. I mean, the equipment side, you mentioned you have a $300 mic. My microphone's under $100. I mean, the equipment you need is literally a microphone. I mean, that's it. Nowadays, there's lots of free software out there that you can do the recording through. I have a Audio-Technica ATR 2100. It's probably one of the more common ones. It's, again, $100. And then if you want to get fancy, you can go with what Mike does and get the professional mic. But no, I'm joking. But it's really simple. Don't overcomplicate it. In fact, now, I guess probably back when we started ours, there wasn't a lot of online resources of like, checklists or, action items on how to get started with podcasting. Ultimately, today, you can probably Google it and find multiple checklists online that would guide you through the process, tell you exactly what to do in order to get it set up. So just don't overthink it. Start recording, write down the list of the folks that you want to get onto the show, get them on there, and then be consistent with it once you start it.
2 things that a mentor of mine told me when I was hesitant to get started with the podcast. He said, done is better than perfect. Like, you got to get started, right? You're not going to improve. It's not going to be perfect, but you got to get started. And 2, so I emailed him and I was like, well, what about this? What about this in my house? This is loud. Kids, my boys train their stick horses up and down the hallway, right, when I'm trying to record. And so, all those things that I was worried about, he told me, he just emailed back one line and he said, I interviewed such and such, one of the biggest names in real estate everybody here would know. He said, I interviewed this person while sitting in my Toyota Camry. Point taken, right? Let's get started.
I mean, consider that Russell Brunson, one of the probably best marketers in the world. His podcast, he records it in his car from his phone when he's driving to work. You can hear dinging and, oh my God, this guy almost just ran me off the road. Well, let's get back to this. I think people like that instead of this totally polished thing. And if you get over in your head that just keep it simple and be real, it simplifies a lot of things.
Everything's been said. Russell Brunson, the marketing in your car, that's one thing I was going to talk about. You talked about that.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. But you can have people do these things for you. There's lots of services out there that will do podcasts for you. So if you Google Done For You podcast, you'll find a lot of resources on that. To Kevin Bubb's point now, you can go on YouTube or Google and type in checklist to start a podcast. You want to, you can use that. There's a place called BuzzSumo. You should write that down if you haven't heard about it. BuzzSumo will actually have a crowdsourced of the best articles, and so you can go in there and find the best one on podcasting. Also, you can filter on YouTube and look at the most views from 2018, not necessarily from 2006, 2018. And you could find people because people are constantly wanting to share value and add value, and they know once they do that, then you're more likely to start following them, start listening to what they have to say about it. And yeah, don't worry about, you have a unique voice. There's only one of you. And we always think that, what kind of impact could I make? I'm just little o me. And that's that voice telling you that you're not great or you can't create an impact. And if you listen to that voice, you potentially, will not only hurt yourself, but you're not going to be doing anything that's going to be creating an impact in the world, because you're listening to this voice that says you're not enough and there's nothing that you have to say is special. And so don't listen to that voice. Listen to the other voice that says, screw you, that other voice. I am going to create an impact. I do have something to say. And I don't care if 5 or 10 people listen. I'm going to keep doing it because that's going to grow. Another last thing is Gary Vaynerchuk. Anybody heard of Gary Vaynerchuk? He talked about doing Wine Library TV when he was doing these on YouTube, doing these little videos. And sometimes he would have 5, 6 people watching, 10 people watching, right? But he did it for consistently, over and over and over and over again. And eventually what happens, there's a tipping point where people are like, oh, wow, this one was really good. And now they're going to go back and listen to all your episodes, right? Somebody finds you and they're like, this was so good. Oh my God, you have 200 others? And then they go back and they start listening to all those others, right? So just start doing it. Don't listen to that other voice in your head that says you're not enough, you don't have anything impactful to say. You do. And just make an impact.
I have read those checklists that are available, and I have been, and most of us are listening to podcasts while we're driving and stuck in traffic, which is all of us. And we can say in 30 seconds, I don't like that podcast, let me look and listen to another one that will add value. And I have been reading about the structure. For example, you can see Joe Fairless. He has a specific structure that you know what sound, what's going to happen. So you cannot know and develop a habit based on the structure that have been created for that particular podcast, which have been efficient. And you have Neil Patel, which he doesn't work with podcast. He works with YouTube up to 2 minutes, and he have been very efficient. Now, my question is, from a lead conversion standpoint, which one is better? Would it be the podcast at this time and age, or would it be YouTube?
I think you should do it all. We record our show. I mean, we've had another show that was 5 minutes. It was called REI Classroom, where we have 700 or 800 episodes. Those are real short form. And it's because when I went out and asked people, hey, what can we do better? Some people said, well, can it be shorter? And what do I do with that? Like, tell me what to do. So we had REI tips. Well, we're going to give you a specific tip of what to do, and it's going to be shorter. But most people didn't say they wanted it shorter. So we just kind of did a couple different things. I don't want to overcomplicate it and say, well, you should create multiple podcasts, but almost no matter what you say, well, should it be short? Should it be long? If you poll 100 people, half of them are going to say, oh, I like 30 minutes. That's my drive time. And somebody else is going to say, well, I only drive for 5 minutes, so I like quick things. So you can't please everybody. Just do what works for you, I think. But also, so we record, I do a video podcast. We do have a very structured format. We have an opening jingle, if you will. Then I talk. My VA that does my editing knows at approximately 7 minutes, put a commercial in there, which I used to sell sponsorships that I would not recommend. That's a nightmare. Now we're just our own sponsors. You want to learn about our coaching program? Go here. If you want to learn about our masterminds, go there. And at the end, we have kind of a outro jingle, if you will. But we take that video, we strip out the audio, so we have an audio version that goes, we use a tool called Libsyn. There's a few different ways, but you put it out there and it syndicates to iTunes and every single platform where they're at. We put the video version on our website. We put the video version as a separate podcast in iTunes on Libsyn because some people watch the video version, and then we put our videos on YouTube. So you should take that content and try to replicate it everywhere you possibly can, quite frankly.
All right, we have 3 last questions, and then we're going to break for lunch.
Thanks for coming, first of all. Really appreciate your time and your knowledge. My name's Andy Nix. I'm from Denver. As far as the remote interviewing, start listening to podcasts, and you get all these great sources of knowledge, and reaching out throughout the world to make that happen. How does that work? Kind of a technical question, but a little bit behind the scenes on getting big names or good content on your podcast.
One thing, I can speak to that because obviously I had no experience in the syndication or hadn't done a deal yet, right? But I was immediately able to get some really big names in the business on the show, and I can tell you, be professional. Every interaction with them is very professional. They see you mean business, my websites. But I had a really big name, everybody would know, contact me, and he said, I didn't know who you were, okay, but I went to your website, it seemed very professional. I felt like I knew you just from different things online. And so I agreed to be on your show. He said if it hadn't been professional, I would not have been on.
All right, so Kelly, go ahead and ask your question, and then Bill will be last.
Thank you very much for coming and making this value for us. But I haven't listened to any of your podcasts, and I hadn't known any of you till today, and I didn't think that I've never been involved in the podcast much and listening to them. So it's a new idea to me. And I don't think I'm going to do a podcast. And last night I wasn't thinking for sure I'm not, but now just listening to this, I've got some ideas that maybe we'll think about it. But Do any of you have on your podcasts the features or ability, or do you, in your interviews, have callers that can call in, ask questions, maybe to your guest or you about things related to that, how it fits their need? And is that a good idea?
It's a good question. So podcasts typically are recorded previous, so you can go back and listen to them. But you can do these. We're starting to experiment more with this, which is doing a Facebook Live and basically turning that into a podcast. I don't know if you guys do some of that. And you can do some really interesting things. I just got back from a big event in San Diego where people were talking about how much power this has, because you can actually boost your live when you're on it, when you're live, which is pretty powerful. I did not know you could do that, by the way. And you can record that live and you can save it into a video and then basically turn it into a podcast, whatever you need. But what's cool about on the live is that now Facebook has a feature where you can interact and even bring somebody on if you want to, which I think is very powerful whenever you have someone else come on there. I do think people start listening to podcasts typically because they just want to get like one or two little nuggets and while they're driving, typically while they're driving. And it's one of those things I think where you can almost get too much noise. For example, we were talking about this, Michael Blanc. How many, if you ever had more than one person on the podcast, it's okay, but it kind of gets a little noisy, right? So you want to keep it pretty focused and let the person you're interviewing talk most of the time. And I would be very careful on getting too much noise on there. It's not like a radio show where people can call in and, did I win the car? Something. But, so I just think about that.
All right, I had one piece of input. This is, how did you get a mic? I thought we were done. All right, so, on my podcast, I was in Chicago a few months ago. I'll stand up because you can't. I was in Chicago a few months ago, and I was just chatting with somebody, and Brandon, and he started asking me some questions, and we had this idea, and we're like, you know what? You should come. Would you be willing to come on my podcast and just ask me all these questions so that everybody else can hear them? Because he was asking he had 15 multifamily questions, and I was like, just come on my podcast and ask me, and we had to split it into 2 episodes. But I was driving. I listen to my own podcast. I'm vain, and and I was just driving and I was listening to that podcast. I was like, this is a really good idea. So I would suggest that for some of us. If you have a podcast and you're always asking the questions, turn it around and let somebody brand new ask you the questions that a brand new person would ask to help your audience as well. So that's my answer to your question.
Yeah, it's a good segue. My name is Ramakrishna from Cupertino, California. So, what is the style of podcast? What is the style of podcast that you recommend? Is this like interview style, like a story style, like this is the new segue to that? Actually, like any other ideas that is new?
I was gonna say, if you're starting out, that's how I started out. Is I just wanted to learn, so I interviewed. And then over the years, I became an expert and could talk more. But it's you can do it any way you want, and everybody's looking for the next cool thing. So come up with your own creative way.
I think that's dependent upon where you're at in your process. I'm interviewing 30 experts or more a month, so it forces me to learn a lot, right?
One of the things I'd add is, so you should, exactly what Kathy said, you should do what you're comfortable with. But again, back to why are you doing it? You need to think about where you're taking. Think of it this way. So a good friend of mine is, everybody knows here, a real smart marketing guy. And he talks a lot about the customer journey, right? So think about where do you want to take that customer? Ultimately, we all have an ulterior motive as to why some of this is just our own ego, right? Some of it is just, I feel good sharing knowledge. But unless you have a business reason for this ultimately, you have an opportunity cost of your time. I love doing it. I love networking with people. But I know now I have to take them somewhere, ultimately. And people that resonate with you want you to take them somewhere, right? So in terms of your content, who you're interviewing, or your style, I would think about trying to insert yourself into their journey. Where are they at, and where do you want to take them? That should really drive your content and your style, I think.
And I think one thing to add there, the consideration that you need to have as well, as far as like your own time and involvement, is an interview style podcast takes much less time than a 45-minute show that's just you talking on a particular topic or subject matter. So it's probably about at least 5 times the amount of energy and effort to do the individual show versus the interview style.
So we have an email list, and before I started the podcast, I like, okay, I should ask. Anybody read a book called Ask? It's a really, really good book. If you haven't read it, you should buy it. It's really good. Basically, it's a guy, Ryan Levesque, I believe it is, and he essentially created a format for the best way to build up his list and get conversions, and really comes down to asking what people want. So to our email list, I was like, hey, I'm getting ready to start a podcast. Well, what do you want to learn? And I got a ton of responses that came in from that, and then I just basically started making a big list of those. And if you listen to the podcast now, it's the same questions. I chose to do this. It's the same questions that I ask every single guest, but it seems like a very different and kind of interesting, because everybody has a way of answering those questions, and they're all different answers. So for example, we might ask someone, what's your favorite mobile app that you use in your business on a daily basis? Well, people wanted to know that. On my list, they wanted to know, what are the mobile apps that people are using? What's your why? What's your why? What makes you get up in the morning and keep doing this? You know, what's your strategy that sets you apart from everyone else? How did you get started? And all these questions, you'll just keep it as a structure. And it's just an easy way. So if you have a list, I'm encouraging you to ask your list, what is it that they want to learn? And then you've kind of built in that success already, because you're not guessing, you're already going off what your list, your supporters, are telling you what they want to learn. So great book, by the way, Ask, and just ask your list.
Last question back here. Hey, can I add one little tip to that, like a little pro tip that I'm not even doing myself, but I know I should be doing? It's going to answer a couple of questions like building your list and communicating with your audience. So right now we have a checklist that we go through. We use a tool called Asana. We have like an 80-point checklist for every show, what we do. And honestly, I record the show and I send an email to my team to say, hey, I'm done, and they do everything else. So we've got it pretty dialed in. But one of the things we do is my VA has to ask the guest for a thumbnail image of themselves, because we create a marketing image that has like the name of the show and has their picture. But one thing that we could do, it's hard when you've been doing something for so long to just kind of shift gears and make little tweaks sometimes, is to create a same ad that we could post on Facebook and say, hey, we have a show coming up. Corey Boatwright's going to be on it. What questions should we ask him? Right? So you kind of ask more like a radio show. We could be asking just a Facebook post. They're just posting questions inside of there. Of course, I could tag Corey on it, so his people are going to want to know about it. And then what we do is we could send an email to our list to say, same thing, we could drive them from our list to that post to say it's coming up. And then right after the show, my show normally comes out about 2 or 3 weeks after we record it, because we have a little bit of a pipeline. So we could post something, literally I could run paid traffic to this, because I have products at the end where we get people to say, hey, I just interviewed Corey Boatwright. We talked about these awesome things, this, that. Do you want to be notified first when it comes out? Well, every Thursday we send, we have about 100,000 people on our list. We send a newsletter every Thursday when we publish a show. We just released it with Corey Boatwright, right? But I could basically be marketing. How would you like to be notified first? Well, we notify 100,000 people first. But my point is they're just getting on our list, and we're just sending them something we're already doing anyway. And that could be the start of the relationship, at least. So.
All right, last question. Appreciate all the good information, and thanks for the idea of inviting guests onto your podcast and leveraging your guests list. But if you were starting today and wanting to jumpstart that listenership, what would you do?
I mean, I think that's really that's how I've seen people do it. Joe Fairless came to me when he first started, and man, that guy just took off, and he just interviewed all the top podcasters. And what happens is when, on the search engine, when someone's searching Kathy Fedke, well, you just interviewed me, so your show comes up too. So that's a big way to do it. But like I said, anyone who has influence in your community, in the world that you're in, you interview them and they get excited and they tell everybody so that you get all these new people. That's one way. And consistency. And when you come out the gate, you should have 5 podcasts ready, recorded, and just uploaded consistently in the beginning, and that will raise your rankings in the beginning because you have that like 8 weeks, right? The new and noteworthy section where you get a little bit more play than the rest of us.
That takes me back to, is it Cece? Yeah, her question earlier too kind of goes with yours as far as different platforms also. You know, being on, and Kathy mentioned it, I've looked up people myself that I knew I wanted to listen to, and they'll come up on, say, YouTube, you know, in Google. They'll come up as being on somebody else's podcast. Well, then I get my phone out and pull out the app and go to that show number in that person's podcast. I don't actually watch it on YouTube, you know, because I want to listen to it while I'm working out or doing something else, but I found it on YouTube. That's what took me there. So lots of platforms, you know, so you can be found, or your people on your show can be found and find you.
I would say on CC too about the conversion, specifically your question about conversion. I have a report. I'll give it to Adam. It actually, the short story on it. It compared like a YouTube video and a podcast and a Facebook video with or without words, transcription basically of it, or the subtitle, and it talked about specifically about the conversions that were coming from that, and they did it from a cost per view, and they ran a pretty interesting kind of split test on these. And I'll give you this report, but basically podcasts beat Facebook videos, they beat YouTube videos, and the funny thing is people that are watching Facebook videos, they don't listen to them typically. Their sound's off. So if you don't have any words or any kind of subtitle or anything on there. And the new thing right now is called video memes, by the way. So if you have a headline at top and the video in the middle and a call to action on the bottom, that's a very big thing right now that's exploding. But podcast, what's cool about podcasts is you capture their attention because you usually got 2 headphones in. And so it's just you and that person you're listening. So all the noise is cut out. And so I believe, I don't know why, but I believe that that's probably one of the reasons the conversion was so much higher. So I'll give you that report. And your question on what you would do to leapfrog, it goes with what they said as well, which is affiliate marketing, essentially. But when you affiliate market, what's interesting is you are basically buying credibility, whoever you're working with, and you have to take that relationship serious, for sure. But if you guys have a good relationship and they happen to have a platform, a list, and essentially if you just ask them, hey, would you mind sending out an email to your list, letting everybody know, and I'll do the same for mine? And so it's just a mutual back and forth. The fastest way for you to get, and ask them to post on social media, the fastest way is because whenever they post on Facebook, all their friends, especially if they have 5,000 or how many friends they have, all those friends will see you on there, and it just immediately starts adding that authority in the marketplace. And that's one of the fastest ways to do it now, is asking them to post on your social media, asking them to send out to the list, and you get this new authority. And then you can actually use that for a lot of different things. Like Mike said, you could target audiences. You can go into Facebook and see people that like their podcast also like these other podcasts, or they follow these pages. And so there's all these other ways you can start targeting to find people and running an ad to them.